The desert stretched endlessly under the burning sun, silent and dry as if time itself had stopped there. The wind carried dust across the empty plains, and the sound of hooves echoed through the lonely land. Eli Thompson rode slowly, his hat tilted low to block the harsh light. His horse, Dusty, walked at a steady pace, knowing every inch of the path they'd ridden 1,000 times. Eli had once been known as one of the best ranchers in Arizona, but those days had long passed. His wife Mary and their little boy had died years ago from fever, and since then the light had gone out of his eyes. He lived alone now on a small ranch miles away from the nearest town. People in town sometimes said Eli Thompson had turned into a ghost with a heartbeat, a man who spoke to no one and kept his heart locked away. That evening, he rode toward a canyon in search of a few cattle that had wandered off. The air was thick with heat and the sun was sinking low, painting the sky in red and gold. Eli's thoughts were as empty as the land around him. He liked it that way. Solitude had become his only companion. Then, through the silence, he heard something, faint at first but unmistakable. A sound that didn't belong to the desert. It was a cry. Weak, broken, and distant. Eli pulled his horse to a stop and listened again. The cry came once more, carried by the wind, at a woman's voice. He frowned. Out here, people didn't cry for help unless death was close. He hesitated for a long moment, torn between curiosity and caution. The Wild West wasn't kind to strangers, and many traps had been set with the same kind of cries. Still, something deep inside him stirred, something human that he hadn't felt in years. He clicked his tongue and guided Dusty toward the sound. The path twisted through rocky ground until he reached a small hollow beside a broken wagon. There, lying in the dust, was a young woman. Her clothes were torn, her face pale, lips cracked from thirst. Her eyes opened weakly as Eli stepped closer, his hand resting on the revolver at his side. The woman looked at him. Her eyes were tired, hopeless, and whispered in a trembling voice, "Just kill me. Please, just kill me." The words froze him where he stood. He wasn't sure he'd heard her right. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice low. "Please," she whispered again. "Don't save me. Just end it. I can't go on anymore." Eli stood still, the wind brushing dust against his boots. He could have turned away. He could have left her there and no one would have known. But something in her tone reminded him of a night long ago, when he had held his wife's hand as she begged him to help her breathe. And he couldn't. With a heavy sigh, he put away his gun, knelt beside her, and poured water from his canteen against her lips. She tried to drink, her body trembling. He lifted her gently, surprised by how light she felt, and placed her on his horse. "Hold on," he said softly. "You're not dying out here." The ride back to his ranch took hours. The sky turned dark and stars filled the heavens. By the time they reached his cabin, the woman had fainted again. Eli carried her inside, laid her on his cot, and covered her with a blanket. The room smelled of old wood and smoke. It had been years since anyone but him had slept there. When she woke the next morning, sunlight spilled through the window. She looked around, confused. Eli sat by the table sipping black coffee. He turned when he heard her stir. "You're awake," he said simply. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice rough and quiet. "My ranch," he replied. "Found you near the canyon." She tried to sit up but winced from pain. Eli handed her a cup of water. She drank it slowly, her eyes never leaving his face. There was kindness in his roughness, and she could see it, though he tried to hide it. "What's your name?" he asked after a pause. "Clara," she said. "Clara Weston," he nodded slightly. "You were lucky I found you. What happened out there?" Her face tightened with grief. "My father and I were on our way west. He was a preacher. We were going to start a new life near the border, but we were attacked." Eli said nothing, letting her speak. "They came out of nowhere," Clara continued, tears filling her eyes. "3 men. They shot at our wagon. My father told me to run, so I did. I heard him scream, and I kept running. I thought if I stopped, they'd find me. I've been walking for 2 days. I thought I was already dead." Eli stared into his coffee, silent for a long time. Finally, he said, "You're safe now." "Safe?" she whispered. "Nowhere is safe out here." She was right, but Eli didn't argue. He just stood up, grabbed his hat, and said, "Rest, I'll be outside." The days that followed passed slowly. Clara grew stronger, though the pain in her eyes never faded. Eli kept his distance, busying himself with chores, feeding the horses, fixing fences, and avoiding conversation. But Clara watched him from the porch. She noticed how he never smiled, how he talked to the animals more than to her, and how his eyes looked as lonely as the land around them. One evening, she finally asked, "Why do you live here alone?" Eli didn't look up from his work. "Because I'm good at it." Was there no one? She pressed softly. He stopped hammering the fence post and looked toward the sunset. There was. But the desert takes what it wants. Clara didn't ask again. She understood enough. That night, the wind grew stronger, howling through the dry grass. Eli sat by the fire, carving a piece of wood, while Clara read from a small Bible she carried in her bag, the only thing she had left of her father. The sound of her soft voice filled the room, and for the first time in years, Eli felt something like peace. But peace in the West never lasted long. A sudden gunshot shattered the quiet. The sound echoed across the plains. Eli jumped to his feet, grabbing his revolver. Clara froze, eyes wide with fear. "Stay inside," Eli said sharply, pulling on his coat. He stepped out into the night. The air was cold and the moon hung low over the desert. He walked slowly toward the open field, his boots crunching on dry earth. Another sound reached him. The faint creak of a saddle, the soft imprint of boots in the dust. He knelt and saw fresh tracks heading from the direction of the canyon. Someone had been watching the cabin. When he returned inside, Clara was standing near the door, trembling. "What was it?" she whispered. Eli looked at her, his face hard. Riders, maybe just passing through, maybe not. She clutched the edge of the table. "It's them," she said in a broken voice. "The same men. They'll come back." Eli holstered his gun and stared out the window. The wind was rising again, carrying the smell of sand and smoke. He could see fear written all over her face, but beneath it, there was trust too. Trust she didn't mean to give, but couldn't help. He turned to her and said quietly, "You said you wanted to die." But not tonight. Clara didn't answer. She just watched him walk to the door again, his shadow stretching long across the floor. Outside, the desert waited, silent, endless, and filled with secrets. Somewhere out there, danger was moving closer, and for the first time in years, Eli Thompson felt something more than loneliness. He felt a reason to fight again. The night grew darker, and the howl of a coyote echoed through the hills, a warning, a promise, and the sound of fate drawing near. The night stretched long and uneasy. The wind carried the smell of dust and smoke, and Eli barely slept. He sat by the window with his rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the dark horizon. Somewhere out there, someone was watching. Inside, Clara lay on the cot, her eyes open though she pretended to sleep. Every sound, the wind, the creak of the old wood, the faraway cry of a coyote, made her heart pound. She could still see the faces of the men who had attacked her, their cruel laughter echoing in her mind. She prayed she would never see them again. By dawn, Eli saddled his horse and checked his rifle. Clara came out, her hair loose, eyes heavy with worry. "You're going after them, aren't you?" she asked softly. "I'm just checking the tracks," he said, tightening the reins. "If they're close, I need to know." "Then I'm coming with you," she said firmly. Eli looked at her, half surprised. "You can barely stand a full day in the sun." "I'm not hiding again," she replied. "Not this time." There was strength in her voice, the kind of strength that comes from losing everything. Eli didn't argue further. He nodded once and helped her onto the horse. They rode silently through the open plains. The morning sun climbed slowly, bathing the sand in gold. For miles there was nothing, no smoke, no horses, no sound except the wind. But near the canyon, Eli found what he was looking for: fresh hoofprints. 3 horses. He crouched, tracing the marks with his fingers. "They camped here last night," he said. "Couldn't have gone far." Clara looked around nervously. "What will you do if we find them?" "Whatever I have to," Eli replied in a quiet, heavy tone. They turned back toward the ranch before sunset, planning to gather supplies and move out early the next morning. But as they neared the cabin, Dusty snorted and stopped. Eli raised his hand, listening. There was silence, the kind that comes before trouble. Then a single gunshot rang out. Eli pulled Clara down behind a fallen log. Bullets hit the dirt near them, sending sand into the air. 3 riders were approaching fast, their faces half covered with bandanas. "It's them!" Clara gasped. Eli's jaw tightened. "Stay down." He took careful aim and fired once. The lead rider fell from his horse. The others fired back, shouting curses. Dust and gunpowder filled the air. Eli moved fast, loading and shooting, his eyes sharp, his mind calm. He'd seen death before, too many times. When the noise faded, one horse galloped away into the distance. Two men lay still in the dirt, one moaning weakly. Eli stood up, breathing hard. Clara rushed to him, her hands shaking. "Are you hurt?" He shook his head. "No, but one of them ran. He'll bring more." The injured man tried to crawl away. Eli walked over and knelt beside him. "Who sent you?" he asked coldly. The man spat dust, coughing. "The boss. Wants the girl. Says she's got something that belongs to him." Clara's face turned pale. "That's not true," she whispered. "I don't have anything." Eli's eyes narrowed. "Then he's lying to get her back." He looked down at the man. "Tell your boss if he comes here again, I'll be waiting." The outlaw didn't answer. Eli stood up, his face grim. "We have to move tonight." They packed quickly, water, food, a blanket, a lantern. Eli helped Clara onto the horse again, and they rode into the deep canyon behind his ranch. It was a place few knew about, hidden by high red cliffs and narrow paths. Years ago, Eli had used it for cattle. Now it was their only chance to stay alive. By the time they reached the canyon's heart, night had fallen. The stars were bright above them, and the air felt cooler. Eli started a small fire, careful to hide the smoke under the rocks. Clara sat close to the fire, her hands trembling slightly. "I didn't tell you the whole truth," she said quietly. Eli looked up from his rifle. "Go on. My father. He wasn't just a preacher," she began, her voice shaking. "He was carrying something important, a map. It showed a place where a lost gold mine was hidden. He said he was going to use it to build a new church for people who had nothing. But those men found out. That's why they came after us." Eli frowned. "Do you still have the map?" She nodded slowly and pulled out a small folded paper from inside her dress. "I tried to throw it away, but I couldn't. It's the last thing left of him." Eli stared at the paper but didn't take it. "Gold brings nothing but blood," he said. "Keep it safe, but don't let it lead you." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the crackle of the fire. Clara looked at Eli, his face half lit by the glow. "Why did you save me, Eli?" "You didn't have to." He stared into the flames. "Years ago, I lost everything because I didn't get there in time. When I found you, I thought maybe this was my second chance." Clara's eyes softened. "You blame yourself for what happened?" He nodded once. "Every day." She reached out and gently touched his hand. "Then saving me already made it right." For a moment, neither spoke. The quiet between them was full of something fragile and real, the kind of connection that grows in the shadow of fear. At dawn, the sound of distant hooves woke them. Eli jumped to his feet. The raiders had found their trail again. "Go!" he shouted, grabbing his gun. "Ride east, stay low." Clara refused. "Not without you." "Don't argue," he said, his voice firm but not angry. "I'll draw them away." But she stood her ground. "If you stay, I stay." There wasn't time to argue. The riders appeared at the canyon's mouth, shouting and firing. Eli took cover behind a boulder, returning fire with sharp precision. The echo of gunshots filled the canyon. Clara reloaded the spare rifle and passed it to him, her hand steady despite her fear. A bullet grazed Eli's shoulder, but he didn't stop. He kept fighting, his eyes burning with determination. One rider fell, then another. The leader, a tall man with a scar across his face, shouted angrily and charged forward. When Eli saw him clearly, his blood ran cold. It was the same man who had led the raid on his ranch years ago, the one responsible for his wife's death. Recognition turned Eli's pain into fire. He stepped out from behind the rock and faced him head-on. The two men shot at the same time. The outlaw's gun fell to the ground and Eli's shoulder bled again, but he stayed standing. The man staggered back, then collapsed in the dust. Clara ran to Eli, catching him as he stumbled. "Eli, you're bleeding." He smiled faintly, his face pale. "It's nothing new." "Don't say that," she cried, pressing her hand against the wound. "You saved me again." He looked at her with tired eyes. "You reminded me that life's still worth fighting for." They stayed there until the sun rose, painting the canyon walls in gold. By the time the sheriff's men arrived, warned by a traveler who had seen smoke, the fight was over. The raiders were gone for good. Eli survived, though it took weeks for his shoulder to heal. Clara stayed by his side, caring for him, cooking and helping around the ranch. The silence that once haunted the cabin was replaced with gentle conversation, laughter, and life. As spring came, green grass returned to the land, and Eli began to smile again, something he hadn't done in years. Clara often read aloud by the fire, and sometimes he would listen quietly, carving small wooden figures as he used to for his son. One evening, she stood by the fence watching the sunset. Eli came beside her. "You could still go east, start fresh," he said. Clara smiled softly. "I already did. Right here." Eli looked out at the fading sun, his heart lighter than it had been in years. For the first time, the desert didn't feel empty anymore. That night, the stars shone brighter than ever. The cabin glowed warm against the dark sky. Two lost souls had found each other in a land that offered no mercy. And yet, somehow mercy had found them, in a place where kindness was rarer than rain. They had both learned that hope can survive even in the dust. And from that day on, the man who once lived alone was never lonely again.